I knew I was screwed the second Derek called me sport in front of 24 people. 43 minutes into our Q3 review, and this MBA pretty boy who'd been with Midwest Precision Manufacturing for exactly 4 months was about to destroy 19 years of my life with a PowerPoint slide. My name is Ray Patterson, I'm 47 years old, and this is the story about how I took down a corporate hotshot using the same rules he broke to fire me. The conference room was packed with everyone from HR to the CFO, 2 summer interns who still thought free pizza counted as a benefit, and half the board dialing in from their corner offices. Derek Caldwell cleared his throat with all the fake sincerity of a politician at a town hall. "Ray," he said, oozing that performative regret like syrup on burnt toast. "After thorough evaluation and careful consideration of our operational efficiency goals, we've determined your position is being eliminated. Effective immediately. No warning, no private conversation, no basic human decency. Just a corporate execution in front of everyone I'd worked with since I started as a junior compliance officer right after my Army discharge. Staff Sergeant Patterson, they used to call me. 6 years military police, 18 months in Afghanistan, dealing with investigations and documentation that could mean life or death if you got the details wrong." Derek delivered his verdict wrapped in a PowerPoint transition and that smug smile he always wore when he thought he was being clever. The same smile he'd been flashing since the board brought him in from McKinsey to optimize our human capital deployment. Corporate speak for fire people to make the quarterly numbers look better. 19 years I'd been with this company. Worked my way up through 2 mergers, 3 reorganizations, and more layoffs than I care to count. I'd helped train half the people in that room, including one of the interns who was now studying her shoes like they held the secrets of the universe. Here's what was really eating at me. My daughter Amy just started her sophomore year at Stanford, pre-law program, no scholarship, $78,000 a year. My son Tyler's got his senior year of high school coming up, plays varsity baseball, and needs orthodontic work that'll cost more than most people's car payment. The mortgage has 11 years left on it, and my wife Carol's been talking about finally taking that trip to Ireland we've been planning since our honeymoon 23 years ago. And this guy thinks he can erase me with a slide deck. Here's what you need to know about Derek Caldwell. He showed up 4 months ago with his Northwestern MBA and his consulting firm track record, thinking he could revolutionize a manufacturing operation he'd never actually worked in. The board was breathing down his neck about cost reduction targets, and he was under pressure to deliver results fast. His previous turnaround at a logistics company in Chicago had made him look like a miracle worker, but word was the improvements didn't last once he left. He'd been making changes from day one, the kind that sound brilliant in boardroom presentations but make 0 sense if you understand how things actually work. Cut our safety training budget by 30%, then acted surprised when our incident report started climbing. Eliminated the overtime approval process to streamline operations, then wondered why our delivery schedules began slipping. Guy genuinely believed he was saving the company, but he'd never spent a day on a factory floor. But I didn't argue in that meeting, didn't make a scene, just nodded once and started packing my things while Derek moved on to revenue projections like he hadn't just destroyed someone's livelihood. The thing about being former military is you learn when to fight and when to wait for better terrain. My access badge stopped working before I reached the parking lot. 19 years, and I left with a cardboard box of personal items and whatever dignity I could salvage. That drive home was the longest 18 minutes of my life. Not because I was devastated, but because I was thinking, really thinking, about Derek's presentation, about the timing, about the way he'd staged the whole thing like corporate theater designed to impress the board members watching from their home offices. Carol was in the kitchen when I walked in carrying my box. She took one look at my face and set down her coffee mug. After 23 years of marriage, she could read me like a maintenance manual. "They let you go?" Derek did, in front of the whole team. She sat down at our kitchen table, the solid oak one we'd bought when Tyler was still in diapers and we thought we'd be at that house forever. "What are we going to do about Amy's tuition? And Tyler's braces?" That's when I should have been panicking. Should have been updating my LinkedIn profile, calling headhunters, figuring out how to stretch our savings until I found something else. Instead, I found myself thinking about something that happened about 6 weeks ago. I'd been sitting through a cross-department compliance review, the kind of meeting where they serve stale donuts and everyone pretends to care about policy updates. Our HR director, who's about as organized as a teenager's bedroom, had attached the wrong file to the meeting notes. Instead of the standard employee handbook summary, she'd included the full executive compensation report. Most people would have glanced at that attachment and moved on with their lives. But here's the thing about me. I actually read the boring stuff. Always have. Back in the Army, I was the MP who read the entire regulations manual cover to cover, not just the parts that applied to my daily duties. In Afghanistan, knowing the obscure regulations about evidence handling and documentation procedures meant the difference between a solid case and watching bad guys walk free on technicalities. So I downloaded that PDF without really knowing why. Just one of those instincts you develop after 19 years in compliance work. Filed it away in my personal documents folder and forgot about it. Until now. Give me an hour, I told Carol. I need to check something that might change everything. I went out to the garage where I do my real thinking. Got my '87 Camaro IROCZ out there, the one I've been restoring for the past 4 years. There's something about working with your hands, fixing something that's actually broken, that helps your mind work better. Plus, the garage has my beer fridge and nobody bothers me when I'm out there. I fired up my laptop on the workbench and found that PDF right where I'd left it. Executive Compensation Adjustments. Q2 to Q4. The kind of title designed to make normal people's eyes glaze over faster than watching paint dry. Clicked it open and started reading. There was Derek's name listed as Regional Manager, Strategic Operations. $2.8 million performance bonus. $2.8 million. For 4 months of work destroying a company that other people had spent decades building. But it was the fine print that made me sit up straight in my chair. There was this little asterisk next to his bonus amount, referencing Section 4B of the Executive Incentive Agreement. Most people would have stopped reading right there. Corporate legal language puts people to sleep faster than Sunday afternoon football after a big lunch. Not me. That asterisk led to a clause about bonus eligibility being contingent on strict adherence to internal compliance procedures, specifically regarding employee separation protocols and HR review requirements. I sat back in my folding chair and took a long pull of my beer. That clause wasn't just paperwork decoration. It was a loaded gun, and Derek had just pulled the trigger on himself. I needed our current employee handbook, the real one. Not the summary sheet they give to new hires with the company logo and motivational quotes. After 19 years, I knew exactly where to find it in our legacy compliance folder. Hundreds of pages of procedures and protocols written by lawyers who charge by the word. Section 4B was buried in subsection 12 of the Employee Separation Guidelines. Let me translate the legal speak. If any executive-level employee terminates someone without following proper procedure, meaning private meetings, documented performance issues, HR sign-off, legal review, then that executive forfeits any pending bonus for that quarter. The rule got put in place after a lawsuit 5 years back when some VP fired 3 people in a department meeting just to make a point about accountability. Cost the company almost $2 million in settlement fees. The board decided they didn't want managers using terminations as power plays anymore. Derek had violated every single requirement. No private meeting. He'd fired me in front of 24 people. No documented performance issues. My last 3 reviews were all meets expectations or better. No HR consultation. They looked just as surprised as everyone else. And definitely no legal review. I opened a new spreadsheet on my laptop. $2.8 million. Gone. Because he wanted to look decisive in front of the board members dialing in from their corner offices. But here's the thing, I couldn't just march back in there waving this policy around like a victory flag. That would tip him off, maybe give him a chance to cover his tracks. This needed to be surgical, patient. The kind of long-term thinking that separates guys who've been through actual combat from guys who think business is war because they read it in some management book. So I went ghost mode, didn't update my social media. Didn't call anyone to complain or ask for job leads. Let people assume I was sitting at home feeling sorry for myself, maybe sending out resumes and drinking too much. Meanwhile, I was building a case that would make a military investigator jealous. First thing I did was access my old company email account. Our IT department moves slower than government bureaucracy. When someone gets terminated, they disable the account but don't actually delete it for 30 days. Security protocol in case there are disputes. And because I still had that training account with elevated permissions, the one I'd set up when I was running new employee orientations, nobody had thought to revoke my system access. The military taught me that intelligence gathering is 90% patience and 10% knowing where to look. I spent the next week going through everything systematically. Email chains, meeting invites, calendar appointments, server logs showing who accessed what files when. Found a message Derek had sent to legal 3 days before he fired me, asking them to prepare transition documentation for my advisory role conclusion. Pure gold. It proved premeditation. He'd planned the whole public execution. Probably thought it would make him look decisive to the board. But the real smoking gun came when I dug into Derek's other recent activities. Turns out I wasn't his first victim. 6 weeks before my termination, he'd fired Janet Morrison from accounting, also in a public meeting. Same pattern. No documentation, no HR consultation, just corporate theater. Janet had been with us for 14 years. Single mom, 2 kids, mortgage payment that depended on her keeping that job. She'd taken a severance package and signed a non-disclosure agreement, probably too scared to fight back against a guy with a fancy title and legal department behind him. But here's what Derek didn't know. Janet and I had worked together on quarterly audit processes for 8 years. I knew she was good at her job, knew she'd never done anything that warranted termination. Her firing was just as bogus as mine, and it established a pattern. I kept digging. Found more violations Derek had made in his 4 months with us. Cut the safety training budget without consulting the safety committee. Violation of OSHA compliance protocols. Eliminated mandatory legal review of contract modifications over $50,000, direct violation of SOX requirements. Started approving overtime without department head sign-offs, breach of our union agreement. Each violation was small by itself, but together they painted a picture of someone who thought rules applied to other people. By the end of the week, I had everything documented. Timeline of violations, witness lists, policy references, server logs, showing he'd never consulted with legal or HR before any major decisions. Everything with timestamps and digital signatures that couldn't be faked. But I still couldn't just dump this on someone's desk. Derek had the board thinking he was some kind of turnaround specialist. If I came forward looking like a disgruntled ex-employee, they'd dismiss me before I got to the good stuff. I needed a different approach. Something that would get the right people asking the right questions without them knowing where those questions came from. That's when I remembered I was technically still in the system. My termination wouldn't be processed through payroll for another 2 weeks. My benefits were still active. My computer login still worked through that old training account, which meant I could still send internal memos. 19 years of understanding corporate culture taught me exactly how to package information so it would get read by people who mattered while looking completely innocent to everyone else. I started with something that would fly completely under the radar. Q3. Compliance review, employee separation protocol updates. The kind of subject line that makes people's eyes glaze over. Sent it to HR, legal, department heads, and board members who'd signed up for policy notifications. The memo was pure bureaucratic camouflage. Thanked everyone for their attention to compliance during recent organizational changes. Gently reminded recipients about the importance of following established protocols, especially regarding Section 4B and its impact on executive compensation. Attached the relevant policy documents with a helpful summary of situations that might benefit from review. I signed it Ray Patterson, Compliance Liaison, Transitional. Vague enough that people would assume it was handover responsibility. Nobody questioned it. Standard corporate busy work from a guy trying to be helpful during his exit. But I made sure to include just enough breadcrumbs to get the right people asking the right questions. Over the next 10 days, I sent 3 more memos. Each one more specific, each one designed to get people thinking about the right issues. The second focused on organizational transitions with a flowchart showing proper termination procedures. The third was my masterpiece, Q3 Executive Performance Review, bonus eligibility verification checklist sent directly to the CFO's office. That checklist contained 27 criteria executives needed to meet for bonus qualification. Derek had failed at least 8 of them. Items like all employee separations conducted per Section 4B protocol and legal review completed for involuntary terminations. Meanwhile, Derek was strutting around like he'd invented management, posting Slack updates about embracing change and calling himself a transformation catalyst. Started bringing expensive coffee to meetings, playing benevolent leader. The same guy who'd fired 2 good people in public was now trying to be workplace hero. But the best part was when he tried to cover his tracks. 4 weeks after my termination, Derek started uploading revised documentation to the HR system. New files that tried to backdate performance reviews and create paper trails that hadn't existed before. Problem was, everything in our system gets timestamped with metadata that can't be faked. His Ray Patterson Performance Concerns file was dated 3 days after he fired me. His employee separation justification memo showed it was created the week after our third quarter meeting. It was like watching someone try to forge an alibi while the security cameras were still recording. I downloaded copies of everything, the original files and Derek's amateur hour cover-up attempts, added them to my growing collection of evidence. But I needed more than documentation. I needed someone on the inside who could make sure all this reached the right people without it looking like it came from me. That's where Nick Torres came in. Nick and I had been grabbing beers at Murphy's Tavern every couple weeks for the past 2 years. He's a solid employment attorney who specializes in corporate disputes, drives a restored '69 Chevelle that makes my Camaro look like a grocery getter. We'd met at a company picnic back when those were still a thing, bonded over classic muscle cars and mutual frustration with corporate politics. I called him on a Sunday evening while I was out in the garage working on the Camaro's carburetor. Ray, please tell me this is about suing someone or finally getting that IROC running properly. Option 1. And I've got documentation that'll make your day. We met at Murphy's the next night. I brought a flash drive and a folder full of printed emails. Nick ordered his usual Coors Light and wings with extra sauce, and listened while I walked him through the entire story. When I showed him Derek's bonus agreement with that Section 4B clause highlighted in yellow, he stopped eating and pulled out his phone to take pictures. Ray, that clause isn't decoration. It's contractual language with real teeth. If what you're telling me is accurate, and it sure looks like it is, your boy Derek triggered the violation himself. Nick went through my evidence for 40 minutes. Email timestamps, policy documents, witness lists, server logs showing no legal consultation before Derek's major decisions. The attempted cover-up documentation, Janet Morrison's identical firing pattern. The backdate attempts, Nick said, pointing to one of Derek's revised memos. That's not just sloppy. That could be considered fraudulent misrepresentation, depending on who reviewed it and when. I could feel something loosening in my chest. Not relief exactly, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing your plan is going to work. You think we have enough? Nick raised his eyebrows and took a long sip of his beer. Ray, this isn't just enough. This is surgical precision. You didn't just catch him breaking rules. You've got a paper trail that leads directly to his bonus clause, created mostly with his own signatures and timestamps. We spent the next hour crafting what Nick called a legal advisory notification. Not a lawsuit threat, not a formal complaint, just a polite professional notice outlining potential compliance issues and their associated impacts on executive compensation. The letter was pure legal diplomacy. As part of ongoing internal compliance assessments, please note that recent executive actions may constitute violations of Section 4B protocols as defined in current employment separation guidelines. Such violations could impact eligibility for performance-based compensation per existing contractual agreements. Nick would file it as part of the monthly legal governance brief, scheduled to be distributed to the board 48 hours before their quarterly meeting. Standard procedure nobody would question. Just routine legal housekeeping that most executives would skim right past. The beauty of this approach, Nick explained, is that you're not accusing anyone of anything. You're just providing information. Let them draw their own conclusions based on their own policies. While we were finalizing our strategy, Derek was busy making things worse for himself. Word around the office was that he'd been bragging to anyone who'd listen about his performance-based restructuring initiatives. Told the board he'd eliminated redundant positions and optimized operational efficiency. Started bringing expensive coffee to morning meetings, playing benevolent leader. The pressure was getting to him, though. I heard through the grapevine that the board was asking harder questions about his cost reduction methods. His Chicago success story was starting to unravel. Turns out those improvements hadn't lasted after he left, and his former company was struggling with the aftermath of his optimizations. Derek needed this bonus, not just for the money, but to prove his methodology worked. Without it, his consulting career would be over, and everyone would know he was just another MBA who looked good on paper, but couldn't deliver sustainable results. That's what made his cover-up attempts so desperate and sloppy. He was trying to rewrite history while the clock was ticking toward the quarterly board meeting where his bonus would either be approved or denied. But every move he made just dug the hole deeper. The backdated documents, the revised performance evaluations, the attempts to create a narrative that justified his actions after the fact, all of it time-stamped and logged in a system that doesn't lie. Meanwhile, I was spending my evenings in the garage, working on the Camaro and thinking through every angle of what was about to happen. The transmission was finally coming together after months of patient rebuilding. Every gear meshing perfectly, every component in its proper place. Carol would come out sometimes with a beer and just sit in the old lawn chair I'd set up near the workbench. "You sure about this plan of yours?" she asked one night. "Derek violated company policy when he fired me. The policy says he loses his bonus. It's that simple." Nothing's ever that simple with corporate politics. She was right, but she didn't understand how thoroughly I'd documented everything, how many safeguards I'd built into the approach, how Nick had crafted the legal notification to be bulletproof. "This isn't politics, Carol. This is compliance, and compliance is what I've been doing for 19 years. The quarterly board meeting was scheduled for Thursday. That's where Derek would make his formal request for bonus approval, probably already planning how to spin his transformation success story for maximum impact. And that's where Nick's legal advisory notification would be sitting on page 6 of the governance brief, waiting like a landmine for someone to step on it. I spent the weekend before the meeting finishing the Camaro's final details, adjusted the carburetor mixture until the engine purged smooth and strong, checked every connection, every fluid level, every component that I'd carefully restored over 4 years of patient work. There's something therapeutic about taking apart an engine and putting it back together correctly. Every bolt has its place. Every part serves a purpose. And when you follow the manual exactly, everything works the way it's supposed to. Kind of like corporate policy when you actually bother to read it. Thursday morning arrived clear and cold. I got up early, made coffee, and sat in my garage looking at the Camaro. Every part was finally where it belonged. Engine purring, transmission smooth, electrical system running clean. 4 years of patient work, following the manual exactly, and now it ran better than the day it rolled off the assembly line. Kind of like what was about to happen in that boardroom. Nick had filed the legal advisory notification exactly as planned. Page 6 of the quarterly governance brief, distributed to all board members the night before. Standard procedure that wouldn't raise any flags, just routine legal housekeeping that most executives would skim right past. But not the CFO, not the board chair. These were people who had been burned before by executives who thought rules were suggestions. I showered, put on my best suit, the charcoal gray one Carol bought me for Amy's high school graduation, and drove to the office for what I figured would be the last time. Derek walked into that boardroom like he was accepting an award. Hair perfect, smile ready for action, carrying coffee for everyone from that overpriced place downtown. The kind of performative generosity he thought made him look like a leader who cared about people. But I could see the tension in his shoulders. The pressure was getting to him. The conference room looked exactly the same as it had 6 weeks ago when he'd fired me. Same gray walls, same generic landscape prints, same polished table that reflected the overhead lights. But the energy was different, quieter, more focused. I took my seat 4 chairs down from the head of the table, opened my notebook, and kept my expression neutral. Around the room, board members were settling in with their coffee and copies of the governance brief. Most of them had that early meeting look, slightly glazed, mentally preparing for another round of PowerPoint presentations and budget forecasts. Derek started with his usual opening joke, but it fell flat. "Don't worry, I brought real coffee this time, not that break room stuff." A few polite chuckles from people who probably hadn't read page 6 yet. Then came the presentation. Q3 performance metrics, cost reduction achievements, operational efficiency improvements. The same corporate buzzword parade he'd been running for months, but with more desperation creeping into his voice. Strategic realignment, talent optimization, cultural transformation. Charts and graphs that looked impressive if you didn't dig into the numbers. "I want to thank the board for trusting me with these necessary changes," he said, clicking to a slide titled Leadership Impact Assessment. His hand was shaking slightly on the mouse. "I know some of the transitions were difficult, but I believe the results speak for themselves." He spent 15 minutes walking through his accomplishments, voice getting higher as he went. Reduced payroll by 18%, streamlined decision-making processes, eliminated redundant positions. All true if you didn't count the fact that he'd violated company policy to do it. "Which brings me to the compensation discussion," Derek continued, his smile getting wider but less convincing. "I believe the performance metrics clearly support the bonus structure we agreed on when I joined the company." That's when I noticed the CFO checking his copy of the governance brief. Page 1, page 2, flipping ahead to find something specific. His pen stopped moving when he hit page 6. He read it twice, then looked up at Derek with new interest. Derek was still talking, something about Q4 initiatives and scaling his methodologies, when the conference room door opened. Patricia Walsh, the board chair's assistant, walked in with a manila folder. She moved quickly to the CEO's seat, whispered something urgent, and handed him the folder before stepping back. The room shifted. You could feel it like air pressure dropping before a storm. The CEO opened the folder and started reading. His face didn't change, but his coffee cup stopped moving halfway to his mouth. Page 1, page 2, then slower as he worked through the legal language. When he reached the attached documentation, I saw his jaw tighten. Derek was mid-sentence about cross-functional synergy optimization when the CEO held up his hand. Let's pause there for a moment. The air got thick. Conversations like this don't happen in boardrooms unless someone's about to get fired or investigated. Derek's face went pale, but he tried to keep smiling. The CEO turned to our legal counsel, a sharp woman who'd been with the company longer than anyone except me and the founder's son. This advisory notification was this part of the standard governance review. She adjusted her reading glasses and nodded slowly. Yes, submitted with the Q3 brief. Page 6 references. Section 4B compliance concerns flagged during routine policy review. Derek blinked rapidly. What compliance concerns? His voice cracked slightly on the last word. The CEO didn't smile. He set the folder on the table like it weighed 50 pounds and looked directly at Derek for the first time since the meeting started. Concerns related to executive compensation eligibility and adherence to employee termination protocols. I watched Derek's face cycle through confusion, recognition, and barely controlled panic. His PowerPoint confidence evaporated like steam. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Derek said, voice climbing an octave. All personnel actions were handled appropriately through proper management channels. The CEO turned toward me. Ray, you're still here in a transitional capacity. Can you clarify the circumstances of your departure? Every eye in the room locked on to me. The moment I'd been building toward for 6 weeks. I looked up slowly, keeping my voice level and factual. I was terminated during the Q3 performance meeting in front of 24 staff members without prior notice, documented performance issues, HR consultation, or legal review. The entire proceeding was recorded per standard meeting protocol. The words hung in the air like smoke from a firing range. No drama, no emotion, just facts that couldn't be argued with. Derek tried to laugh it off, but it came out as more of a wheeze. Well, that's one interpretation. There's obviously more context that needs to be considered here. Our legal counsel was now flipping through her copy of the governance brief, frowning. Did legal review that termination procedure? Derek looked around the room desperately. I assumed the proper protocols were followed. I delegated compliance verification to HR. Which HR representative handled the review? The CFO asked, pen poised over his notepad. Silence, the kind that cost $2.8 million. Derek was sweating now, his expensive shirt showing dark patches under the arms. Look, this seems like a significant misunderstanding. Ray's situation was handled within standard management discretion parameters. The CEO reached for the intercom button on the conference phone. Nick Torres, please join us in conference room A. Derek's face went white. Game over. Nick walked in 3 minutes later carrying his signature manila folder. Black suit, red tie, no expression. He took the empty chair next to me without acknowledgement and slid his folder across the table toward the CEO. Inside were copies of everything. Derek's bonus agreement with Section 4B highlighted in yellow. Screenshots of meeting transcripts with timestamps. Server logs showing no legal consultation before any terminations. Email evidence of his attempted cover-up, including the backdated documents with their telltale metadata. A legal summary that was simple and devastating. The CEO read Nick's documentation twice while Derek sat frozen in his chair. When he looked up, his expression said everything. You planned this. You waited, and now we're here. I gave him nothing back. No smirk, no satisfaction, just professional calm. Derek broke the silence with desperation bleeding through his voice. This feels orchestrated. He clearly planned this whole situation as some kind of elaborate retaliation scheme. I looked at him for the first time since walking into the room. I followed company policy, I said quietly. You didn't. The CEO closed both folders and delivered the sentence that ended Derek Caldwell's career at Midwest Precision Manufacturing, based on documented violations of Section 4B employment separation protocols. Your Q3 performance bonus eligibility is voided effective immediately. We'll also be conducting a comprehensive review of all personnel actions taken during your tenure here. $2.8 million. Gone. Because he thought rules were for other people. Derek opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out but a small choking sound. Board members started gathering their papers. Someone mentioned transition planning. Another voice brought up HR protocols for executive departures. I walked out of that building and drove straight to Murphy's Tavern. Ordered a beer, sat by the window, and watched the corporate world continue turning without me. My phone buzzed with a text from Carol. Amy called. She's so proud of you. Another from Nick. Justice served. Next round's on me. I smiled, finished my beer, and drove home to my garage where the Camaro was waiting. I ran my hand along the hood, feeling the smooth paint job I'd spent months perfecting. Popped the hood and listened to the engine idle. Every component working in perfect harmony, every part exactly where it belonged. Carol came out with 2 beers and handed me one. So what now? Now I finish what I started, I said, gesturing toward the car. And maybe start looking for a new job. One where they actually value experience. She smiled and clinked her bottle against mine. The kids want to take you out to dinner this weekend. Celebrate their dad taking down the corporate bully. I laughed. I didn't take down anybody. I just reminded them what their own rules said. The Camaro's engine settled into a steady purr, every cylinder firing in perfect sequence. 4 years of patient work, following the manual exactly, and now it ran like a dream. Sometimes the system works perfectly when you know how to read the instructions.